John Somnes, author of The Complete Software Engineer's Career Guide, says never negotiate the terms of an internship. Instead, an internship should be focused on learning rather than focused on making money. And I completely disagree. Sure, an internship should be focused on learning. However, negotiating the terms of your contract, including compensation, is one of the most important things that an intern should be practicing and learning about. For that reason, this video is going to cover all of the tips and tricks I've learned with respect to negotiating an offer. Now, my name is Matthew Ventures, and I've negotiated over 10 offers within software development and game development in general. And I'm here to share my tips and tricks, as well as all the mistakes I've made, so that hopefully you won't make the same mistakes. If that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting subscribe or giving this video a like, because it really does go a long way for helping the channel. It's free, it takes 2 seconds, but it really does make a huge impact in helping this channel and helping me make more videos like this one. So without further ado, let's jump into the first offer. Zynga, software engineering intern, initial offer $32 an hour with a $1,500 after-tax housing stipend. Now let's break this down. This offer includes 2 visible levers, the first being an hourly company salary, and then the second is a housing stipend. It's pretty typical that offers are going to have these different components that the offer is broken down into. So for example, that could be the hourly wage, it could be housing, it could be stocks, it could be stock options, it could be, a vesting plan. There's a whole bunch of different things that an offer can break down into. But 2 of the most common, especially for contract work, is the housing support, whether that's a stipend or it could be company provided housing. And then the second is going to be the hourly wage. So of special note here is that this stipend is after tax. And that's actually a huge deal, because it means that the company is going to provide more than $1,500, so that after Uncle Sam takes his cut, you're going to be left with exactly $1,500 afterwards, okay? And that's a big deal, because with taxes, if they're offering you $1,500 pre-tax, that could easily, take out 1/3 to 50% of the money, and you might only be left with $1,000 afterwards to actually find housing. So it is a big difference, and it's something to take note of within this offer. One thing that I'd be curious to investigate if you received an offer like this is whether or not this stipend has to be explicitly used for housing. So for example, if you already live very close to your place of work, could you instead pocket the $1,500? Or let's say you find housing for $1,000 a month. Could you then pocket the $500 a month as additional spending money? How exactly does that work? That's a really important part of this offer for you to consider. Ultimately, this was a great offer for me, and it's one that I accepted without a counter. After this internship was completed, I felt like I had a really strong idea of what it was like to work as a software engineer, and my next internship would actually take me across the country to New York City to work as a game designer. Offer number 2, tilting point for a game design intern. This was an offer of originally $11.25 per hour. Okay, so my first thought when I got this offer was, whoa, $32 per hour with the housing stipend down to $11 an hour and a quarter with no stipend at all. Okay, now that's a serious pay cut, but it's probably one of the most important lessons that I needed to learn with respect to how significant a difference in your title or your discipline can make on your compensation. It's no secret that in the game industry specifically, software engineers make a ton more money than designers. And yet I still felt this offer was a bit of a lowball, so I decided to counter. Now, if you decide to counter an offer, it could be a difficult or perhaps a high pressure discussion. And one of the most important things is for you to prevent it from becoming too impersonal. Now, there's something to be said about not getting emotional about these kind of things, but that's a different story than not being personable or friendly during this discussion. And I think for that reason, if you could do it in person, that's really the best way for you to negotiate your offer. If not, perhaps you could do it over a video conference. If not, then maybe a phone call, and then as a last resort, you could send them an email. But as we all know, words can be very easily misunderstood over text. And if you can, turn this into a verbal or a video conversation, that's a way better scenario. And so I ultimately decided to Skype with my employer and ask for more compensation. But before I had that meeting, I made sure to do my research and come into that discussion with as much information as possible. And when you're entering a negotiation, it's often the case that he who has the most information is the one who's going to be the best prepared for that discussion. And if this is an employer, if it's a recruiter, they've done this a ton, right? They've probably done this with dozens of applicants. This could be your first time negotiating an offer. You want to go in there with as much power as you can. And the best way to do that is looking up, what does this title or this discipline usually earn? For example, if I can look up tons of other gameplay engineering or gameplay design, for this role it's design. So if I could look at other game designer roles, particularly in New York City, and see what they're getting paid, that could be a really good bargaining point to say, hey, this is what fair compensation for this role really should look like. Alternatively, there's a lot of free available cost of living calculators where you can say, hey, you know what, this is what it takes to live in this area or to live in this city, and the offer is really not close enough for that, for me to be earning a living wage. So these are two different approaches you could take to coming into that discussion with as much information as possible. And it was through a mix of all that's exactly what I did. I came into the discussion with a counter offer with a lot of support from documentation with respect to what does a living wage look like in New York City, and also what are other game designers making. My counter offer was $20 an hour with a monthly $1,200 after-tax housing stipend. And we could, for a moment, just appreciate kind of how ridiculous that is. That's a huge ask, right? It's roughly 3 times the amount of financial compensation that I was offered. And the truth is, I didn't expect to earn this from this company because Tilting Point, it was a startup. It wasn't making money. It wasn't doing so well. And so I wasn't expecting to gain that, but I was expecting to come in with the moral high ground of, hey, this is what I think I should be earning. And what they ultimately did was they gave me a counter to my counter. And that's what I eventually accepted. It was a $14.75 per hour wage. Okay, so let's look at that for a second. It's pretty far from my counter. It doesn't include a monthly housing stipend, and I eventually just had to live in with, I moved in with my godmother, and I made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every day for lunch, okay, because I couldn't afford to eat out. That was just my financial situation at the time. However, this $14 an hour or $15 an hour is roughly 150% what they initially offered me, right? So even though I didn't get my counter, it was a huge improvement. And so I think this really speaks volumes to, if you're not, if you don't feel that the offer is fair, you should always do a counter. And, the worst that can happen is they say no. In all of my negotiations, I've never once had an employer say something along the lines of like, oh, we're not going to hire you if you counter. I came in with the information to show why it was reasonable, and the employer really respected me for doing that. So I would highly recommend, you to do the same, and perhaps you could have a success story like this. Even though I didn't get what I wanted, it was a lot better than what I was initially offered. Let's say compensation is non-negotiable. Let's say you come back at them with a different compensation amount, and that's not really something they're going to budge on. I think it's really important to mention that a counteroffer does not need to always alter the compensation. There are many more levers that you can push and pull in order to make an offer more appealing, and we're going to talk about some of those in the next offer. NCSoft Software Engineering Intern with an initial offer of $30 per hour. Now, this is a pretty strong offer from NCSoft. It probably could have included housing support or even relocation support, and we'll talk about relocation support for just a second here. So I go to school at Stanford University, which is practically a neighbor of Foster City, okay? It's literally one Uber or Lyft ride away. But any other candidate might have needed to fly in. And I'm almost positive that if another candidate needed to fly, they would have supported relocation expenses for airfare. Now, when an offer like that is presented to a candidate, it might be worth considering how that factor, for example, airfare, can be perhaps parlayed into something else. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say that if you're not going to be using airfare, but that would be traditional, but he was actually from Hawaii, okay, not part of the continental United States. His home was in Hawaii, and what he decided to do was leave school a little bit early and go on a vacation back home to Hawaii. And he said, that's where I want to be taken from and put back to. Google essentially paid for him to go on a vacation to visit his family in Hawaii, even though before and after his internship, he was just going to school in a neighboring state. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, where you can look at this. Every single one of these terms is really an opportunity for you to pull that lever and maybe turn it into something new. In addition to hourly compensation and housing, as well as relocation expenses, here are some of the other affordances or levers which you might consider turning. Professional development, so for example, visiting a conference in game development, that might be GDC. There's also time commitment. You could perhaps explore alternative working hours or maybe a vacation time adjustment. I almost always try to negotiate my internships down from the traditional 12 weeks to 10 or even 8 weeks, which allows me to spend more time on my business while still getting to put that internship on my resume. I would say that within an internship, the first 2 months are just learning, where the last month in a traditional 3-month internship is your 100% productivity. You're just putting out content, and now you're finally making money for the company. But hey, you know what? If you're there for the learning, what if you just left after the 2 months of learning? And that's what I've done in several internships. I've gotten as much as I could out of them. And when I felt like, hey, you know what? I've learned as much as I could at this point, I could say, hey, you know what? This is only going to be an 8-week internship. And so you can sort of plan for that in advance. And it's something I've done successfully several times. Additionally, there might be benefits, and this is something we'll talk about with my Facebook offer, including something like healthcare, dental, or some other form of wellness. Finally, you can consider changing the title. That's kind of a crazy thing, but it's exactly what I did for this internship. Instead of being credited as a tools engineer, I asked for them to credit me as a gameplay engineer. And what that did was it allowed me to put gameplay engineer on my resume, which was actually the title I was most interested in pursuing in full-time employment. So I was able to put down my dream title on the resume. Additionally, while I did ask for a GDC conference ticket, they weren't able to provide that for me. Instead, they gave me access to the GDC Vault, which allowed me to see all of the videos from the GDC conferences in a video on demand format. Bottom line is, get creative, okay? There's always a way that you can negotiate the offer, even if it's not explicitly negotiating the financial compensation. And on the subject of compensation, let's talk about my Facebook offer. So the number 4 offer was Facebook for a software engineering internship. This offer was insane. It was an $8,000 monthly stipend with company-provided housing on top of that. Folks often talk about the FAANG internship. That's FANG, where that stands for an internship working at Facebook, Apple, Netflix, or Google. And these companies are known for some serious financial compensation packages. Okay, and honestly, I'm going to be honest with you guys here, even if it's a little politically incorrect. I think sometimes that does attract the wrong kind of candidate. When I was working at Facebook, I remember specifically in my intern pool, there was a bunch of people who were pretty much obsessed with how much money they were making. And some of them admittedly didn't even like their jobs. For me personally, the passion part always comes before the compensation part. It's my belief, despite that though, that you should always be working for a fair wage, regardless of whether or not it's your passion. So look, I know a lot of people are getting into video game development specifically because they're passionate about it, okay? But there's this quote that's really inspired me and framed my perspective from Dan Luck, who wrote F You Money, or Fuck You Money, right? And so in his book, he says, instead of saying, I love this job so much I would do it for free, reframe it to say, I love this job so much it's the only thing I do for work. It's the only thing I do for money. I feel like that's such a powerful reframe because it really helps me to reconsider why I'm in this business and what I deserve with respect to a living wage for the work I'm putting out. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. Let me know in the comments section, because the difference between money making and meaning making is sort of a big thing I've been thinking about recently for my career, and I want to know what your thoughts are too. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think. Ultimately, I accepted this offer unaltered, but my only regret is that I didn't take full advantage of all of the opportunities I had at my disposal. So Facebook offers wellness reimbursements, which essentially means you get some money in your pocket, or at least you have some money that you could have in your pocket if you apply for one of the wellness programs. So I could have applied for a gym membership, a yoga membership. I could have even got a scuba certification. And I don't know about you, but I've always dreamed of having a scuba certification so that when I go to maybe Hawaii or somewhere special, I could do scuba diving. And yet I didn't take advantage of this because I found out about it a little bit too late. So for that reason, all the more so, I think it's very important you investigate all the different opportunities your job has available to you so that you can take full advantage of your offer and you don't make the same mistake I did. Who knows, right? You might even leave with a few scuba lessons or something like that. Now, for my final offer, I did need to take a plane. So let's talk about how I negotiated that travel offer for a big win. Hangar 13, a software engineering internship. I was initially offered $25 an hour with company-provided housing and a two-way flight. Now, this company was offering a two-way flight. However, I was living in New York at the time, and they anticipated I was going to be flying from Stanford, which is where I'm studying for university. Now, I'm pretty sure a one-way flight from New York costs more money than a round-trip ticket from Stanford, where the destination is Novato. However, I was able to play this off as a bit of a concession in saying I didn't need a return flight. And that helped me wiggle out of another part of the offer. You see, the company provided housing would have included them finding an apartment for me to rent. However, I instead asked for them to give me a stipend so that I could find my own housing. And this was the offer they eventually accepted. After getting the apartment stipend, instead of finding my own housing, I decided to find a roommate, and I sublet or roomed with another one of the interns, and that actually dramatically reduced my housing expenses. Additionally, it helped me to get placed very close to the job so that I was able to bike to work instead of using public transit. And this really was a huge difference for me, right? Because I was able to put hundreds of dollars extra into my pocket every month because I sublet instead of getting my own apartment. And it's a huge difference for me, but for the company, it makes no difference at all. They're spending the exact same amount of money. However, it's way more money in my pocket, and it really shows you how, without negotiating compensation really at all, I didn't change how much I was being paid. I didn't change whether or not it was pre-tax or after-tax. I had a huge win just by changing how I was being paid. And I think it speaks to the kind of wins that you can get if you just look at each one of these terms within your offer as a lever that you can negotiate. Well, that wraps up my 5 internship offers and my negotiations for them. If this video helped you, if you enjoyed it, please give it a like. I would really appreciate that. And if you'd like to see the numbers side by side, you can view that in my blog, which is linked in the description below. That blog post also includes 3 internship offers I didn't cover here, including my work for Sony Santa Monica's God of War team, the internship at Epic Games on Fortnite, and Manticore Games. Finally, if you're interested in getting a career in game development, please consider hitting that subscribe button. I'll be covering lots of topics similar to this one. And if you're currently applying for a job within the games industry, check out this video, which will cover how to create a resume for internships in software engineering or specifically game development, including not only how to get past the initial recruiter screening, but how to show your skills and land that job. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.